Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I'm a dark web hitman. My next victim is my neighbor. Hey everyone, I need to get this off my chest. This story is something I never thought I'd be sharing. But here we are. I guess anonymity makes it easier to spill your darkest secrets. I'm not proud of who I am or what I do, but it's my reality. I'm a hitman, and I've been doing this for years. Before you ask, no, I'm not some ex-military high-tech assassin. I'm just a guy who stumbled into this world and found he was good at it, disturbingly good. It all started about 6 years ago. I was going through a rough patch, lost my job, broke up with my girlfriend, and I was drowning in debt. Desperation pushes you to do things you never thought possible. I was spending a lot of time on the internet, looking for ways to make quick cash when I stumbled upon the dark web. At first, it was just curiosity, exploring this hidden part of the internet. But then I found a forum, a community, if you can call it that, where people advertised all sorts of illegal services, drugs, weapons, and yes, contract killings. I don't know why I clicked on it. Maybe part of me wanted to see how far people would go for money. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was talking to someone who called themselves the broker. They asked if I wanted to earn some real money. I guess I should have felt something. Fear, guilt, maybe a hint of excitement, but I just felt numb. The first job was easy. Too easy, in fact. I still remember every detail. It was a cold December evening, and the target was a middle-aged businessman who had pissed off the wrong people. The job came with instructions, even a script. Follow the guy after work. Make it look like a mugging gone wrong. I still feel the adrenaline rush from that first hit. The way my heart pounded as I approached him in the dimly lit parking lot. The way he looked at me, eyes wide with shock as I pulled the trigger. I won't lie, there was a thrill to it. Knowing that I had the power to end a life was intoxicating. I think that's what hooked me. I rationalized it by telling myself that these people probably deserved it. They were criminals, scumbags, or just unlucky souls who got on someone's bad side. I never asked too many questions. I just did the job, collected the money, and tried not to think about it too much. Over time, I got better at it. I learned how to cover my tracks, how to plan meticulously, and how to blend in so no one would ever suspect me. But with each job, I felt a little piece of myself slipping away. I became more distant, more isolated. I stopped seeing my family and lost touch with my old friends. It was like I was living two lives, one as the friendly neighbor who kept to himself, and another as the shadowy figure on the dark web, feared by many, but known by none. And that brings me to now. The broker sent me a new assignment last week. I opened the file and felt my stomach drop. The target was my neighbor, Lisa. I've known her for a couple of years now. She's in her late 20s, works as a nurse at the local hospital, and always has a smile for everyone. She's one of those genuinely kind people that you don't think could have enemies, but here she was, on my list. The instructions were clear. Make it look like an accident. The thought of hurting Lisa made my skin crawl. I tried to tell myself it was just another job, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't help but wonder what she had done to end up on someone's hit list. Part of me wanted to warn her, to tell her to pack up and leave town, but I knew that would be a death sentence for both of us. The broker doesn't tolerate mistakes. and he certainly doesn't tolerate loose ends. I started watching Lisa more closely, trying to figure out her routine without drawing attention. It felt wrong, like I was invading her privacy. I saw her leave for work early in the morning, returning late at night. Sometimes she would stop to talk to me, completely unaware that I was planning her demise. Every time she smiled at me, it felt like a punch to the gut. I needed to know why she was targeted, who wanted her dead, and why. So I did something reckless. I contacted the broker using a secure channel, asking for more information. It was a huge risk, but I had to know. I crafted my message carefully, making it seem like I needed more details to execute the plan effectively. The reply came faster than I expected. It was a short, cryptic message. She's seen too much. Seen too much. What the hell did that mean? My mind raced with possibilities. Had she witnessed a crime at the hospital? Or was she involved in something darker than her kind demeanor suggested? I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story, something I was missing. But time was running out, and the broker was getting impatient. I had to make a decision: do the job and live with the guilt, or try to find a way to save her and risk both of our lives. Or part of me wanted to walk away, to leave this life behind and start fresh somewhere else. But I knew it wasn't that simple. You don't just walk away from the dark web. I was in too deep, and there was no going back. The thought of killing Lisa made me sick, but the fear of what would happen if I didn't scared me even more. I was trapped, caught in a web of my own making, with no way out. The days are passing, and I know I have to act soon, but every time I see her, it gets harder to go through with it. There's something about her that makes me hesitate, makes me question everything I've done until now. I don't know how this will end, but I feel like I'm standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to plunge into the unknown. Maybe this is the price I have to pay for the choices I've made. Maybe it's too late for redemption. But one thing is clear: I can't keep doing this. Not anymore. I need to find a way out before it's too late, before I become the monster I've always feared I was. I barely slept after finding out Lisa was my next target. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside my window made me jump. My mind was a chaotic swirl of paranoia and dread, but beneath it all was this gnawing curiosity. What had Lisa seen? What could someone as seemingly innocent as her have possibly done to deserve this? The next morning, I knew I had to get closer to her, to figure out what was going on. Lisa was a creature of habit, so it wasn't hard to find opportunities to engage her. That day, I waited until she left for work and decided to make my move in the evening. Lisa's apartment was a mirror image of mine, just across the narrow hall of our aging building. After she came home, I waited a few minutes before I knocked on her door. She answered quickly, her smile as bright and genuine as ever. "Hey, I was just about to make dinner," she said cheerfully. "Want to join me?" My stomach churned at the thought, but I forced myself to smile back. "Sure, that sounds great. I was going to order some junk food, so you'd be saving me." Her apartment was cozy and warm, filled with little touches that made it distinctly hers. Photos of family and friends lined the walls, and a small bookshelf in the corner overflowed with medical texts and novels. The smell of cooking garlic wafted through the air, making the place feel like home. As we ate, I tried to steer the conversation toward her work, fishing for clues without being obvious. "So, how are things at the hospital?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "You must see all kinds of crazy stuff there." She laughed, a musical sound that made my heart sink. Oh, you have no idea. It's a madhouse, especially with the flu season ramping up. But I love it. Helping people makes all the chaos worth it. Ever have any closer calls? I pressed, my heart pounding as I watched her reaction. Lisa paused, her fork hovering over her plate for a moment before she resumed eating. Nothing too crazy, just the usual stuff. Why do you ask? I shrugged, trying to appear casual. Just curious. You hear all these stories on the news about nurses dealing with dangerous situations. Yeah, it can be scary sometimes, she admitted, her smile faltering slightly. But I guess I'm lucky. Nothing like that has happened to me. I could tell there was something she wasn't saying, but I didn't want to push too hard and raise suspicion. We talked a little more about mundane things, neighbors, hobbies, movies, before I made an excuse to leave. My mind was racing as I stepped back into my own apartment. That night, I found myself back on the dark web, trawling through forums and hidden corners, searching for any mention of Lisa or her hospital. It felt like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but I was determined. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something that might explain why someone wanted her dead. After hours of searching, I finally stumbled upon a thread discussing illegal organ trafficking. My heart skipped a beat as I read through the posts. People were talking about a ring operating out of local hospitals, doctors, and nurses being paid off to help facilitate the trade. The accusations were vague, but the location matched Lisa's workplace. Could she have stumbled upon something she wasn't supposed to see? The thought made my skin crawl. I needed more information, so I dug deeper, spending hours piecing together bits of data and anecdotes until I found a name. Dr. Henry Vasquez. He was a senior surgeon at Lisa's hospital, rumored to be one of the key players in the organ trade. I felt sick. If Lisa had discovered Dr. Vasquez's involvement, it would explain why she was a target. She was a loose end that needed tying up. The realization left me cold, and the weight of what I had to do settled on my shoulders like a ton of bricks. But there was another layer to this nightmare. If I took Lisa out, I would be doing the dirty work for these monsters. The idea made my stomach turn. I had become a hitman out of necessity, but I never wanted to be a pawn in a game like this. I was in a race against time now, caught between my duty and my conscience. If I was going to find a way to save Lisa, I needed to move fast and carefully. My mind was a whirlwind of plans and contingencies, none of them feeling quite right. In the days that followed, I kept a close eye on Lisa, watching her interactions at the hospital. I saw her talk to Dr. Vasquez several times, each time looking more tense and worried. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was grim. One evening, I decided to follow Lisa after her shift. She left the hospital looking exhausted, her steps slow and deliberate as she walked to her car. I kept a safe distance, my heart pounding as I shadowed her through the city streets. She parked near the docks, a part of town I rarely ventured into. The area was deserted, abandoned warehouses casting long shadows in the fading light. I watched as she made her way to one of the buildings, slipping inside through a side door. I hesitated for a moment before following her. The building was dark, the air thick with the smell of decay and rust. I crept through the shadows, my senses on high alert. I could hear voices up ahead, low and tense, echoing through the empty space. As I drew closer, I recognized Lisa's voice, strained and determined. She was confronting someone, though I couldn't make out the words. I edged closer, keeping to the shadows until I could see them. Lisa stood facing a man, tall and imposing, with a hard, cruel face. Dr. Vasquez. My heart lurched as I realized the danger she was in. She was brave, but this was no place for bravery. I had to make a choice. I could turn back, walk away, and let events play out. Or I could step in, intervene, and risk everything for someone I barely knew but couldn't bear to see harmed. The decision made itself. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The next moments could mean life or death, not just for Lisa, but for me too. I slipped my hand into my jacket, feeling the comforting weight of the weapon I carried. This was it, the moment that would define whether I was truly beyond redemption, or if there was still a shred of humanity left in me. As I stepped forward, ready to intervene, I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. There was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. In that abandoned warehouse, time seemed to slow down as I approached Lisa and Dr. Vasquez. Every instinct screamed at me to be careful, but the urgency of the situation propelled me forward. I couldn't let Lisa face this monster alone. The scene was tense and charged with danger. Lisa stood her ground, but her eyes were wide with fear. Dr. Vasquez loomed over her, his voice low and menacing as he spat threats. I couldn't hear every word, but it was clear she had uncovered more than she should have. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I prepared to step out of the shadows. But before I could act, something unexpected happened. Lisa raised her voice, defiance and desperation mingling as she confronted Vasquez about the organ trafficking. "You can't silence everyone," she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. "The truth will come out eventually." Vasquez laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You're naive if you think anyone will believe you. People like me are untouchable. You should have kept your mouth shut, Lisa." My mind raced as I realized I had to act now or risk losing any chance to save her. I took one last look at the scene and then stepped into the light, my gun drawn and aimed at Vasquez. "Step away from her," I commanded, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Vasquez turned, surprise flashing across his face before it was replaced by a sneer. "And who the hell are you?" "A concerned neighbor," I replied, trying to keep my voice firm. "Now move away from her, or I'll put a bullet in your skull." Lisa's eyes widened as she saw me, but she didn't say anything. Her silence spoke volumes. She knew this was beyond anything she could handle alone. Vasquez sized me up, weighing his options. He had no idea who I was or what I was capable of, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "All right, let's not do anything hasty," Vasquez said, raising his hand slightly. "We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," I snapped. "Leave now, and maybe I won't report this to the authorities." Vasquez hesitated, and for a moment I thought he might actually back down, but then his expression hardened, and he reached for something in his coat. A gun. Before he could pull it out, I fired. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and Vasquez staggered back, clutching his shoulder with a pained groan. He dropped his gun, and it clattered to the floor. "Run!" I yelled at Lisa, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the door, and I backed away, keeping my gun trained on Vasquez as I followed her. He cursed at us, his voice filled with rage and pain, but he didn't move to stop us. Once outside, we didn't stop running until we were far from the docks, our breath ragged and hearts pounding. We ducked into a small alleyway, trying to catch our breath and make sense of what had just happened. "Thank you," Lisa said finally, her voice shaky but sincere. "I didn't think anyone knew or cared." "I care," I replied, the weight of my actions settling heavily on my shoulders. "I've been watching you, Lisa. I know what you've been dealing with." She looked at me, confusion and gratitude mingling in her gaze. "But why? Why would you risk yourself for me?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "Let's just say I'm not exactly who you think I am, but I couldn't let you face this alone." Lisa nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. She didn't press for more details, and I was grateful for that. We needed to focus on what came next. "What are we going to do?" she asked, fear creeping back into her voice. "We need to go to the police," I said, knowing it was a risk, but seeing no other way. "We have to report Vasquez and everything you know about the organ trafficking. It's the only way to stop them." "But what about you?" Lisa asked, worry etched on her face. "Won't you be in danger too?" "I'll manage," I replied, though the truth was far less certain. The broker would not take kindly to me abandoning a job, let alone intervening like this. But I couldn't think about that now. I had to focus on keeping Lisa safe. We spent the next few hours planning our next steps, trying to figure out the best way to approach the authorities without putting ourselves in more danger. It was a delicate balance, and the stakes were high. As we talked, I learned more about Lisa's discovery. She had stumbled upon suspicious activity at the hospital and started digging, eventually uncovering the organ trafficking ring. It was risky, but she had gathered enough evidence to expose them. "I can't believe I was so naive," she said, shaking her head. "I thought I could just report it and be done." "Sometimes doing the right thing is dangerous," I replied, thinking of the choices that had led me here. "But it's worth it." Eventually, we decided to gather all the evidence Lisa had collected and go to the police first thing in the morning. It was our best shot at taking down Vasquez and ensuring our safety. As night fell, we holed up in a cheap motel, trying to keep a low profile until we could make our move. Sleep was elusive, the weight of what we were about to do pressing heavily on both of us. In the quiet darkness, I thought about my life and the choices that had brought me here. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this darkness after all, a chance to make things right. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. The broker would come for me eventually, and there would be no escaping his reach. For now, all I could do was focus on the present and protect Lisa. Tomorrow would be a turning point, one way or another. I could only hope we would come out of it alive. Morning came, and with it, a growing sense of dread. Lisa and I were both on edge, knowing that our decision to go to the police could either save us or doom us. It was a gamble, but we were out of options. We had to act before Vasquez could retaliate, and before the broker caught wind of my betrayal. We left the motel early, the streets still quiet and bathed in the pale light of dawn. The city felt eerie at that hour, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Every shadow seemed to hold hidden threats, every passerby a potential danger. At the precinct, Lisa and I shared a glance, silently reassuring each other before stepping inside. The place buzzed with activity, officers moving about with an air of efficiency and purpose. We approached the front desk, and I could feel Lisa tense beside me. "We need to speak with someone about a crime," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's urgent." The officer at the desk eyed us suspiciously, but nodded and directed us to a waiting area. The minutes ticked by painfully slowly, each second stretching into eternity as we waited. I scanned the room constantly, paranoia clawing at the edges of my mind. Eventually, a detective came over to us, his expression a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "I'm Detective Harris. What's this about?" Lisa took a deep breath and launched into her story, explaining everything she had uncovered about the organ trafficking ring and Dr. Vasquez's involvement. Her voice was calm and determined, even as she recounted the danger we faced. Harris listened intently, jotting down notes and occasionally asking questions. I watched him closely, trying to gauge whether he believed us or if he was about to dismiss our story as too far-fetched. "And who are you in all of this?" Harris asked, turning his attention to me. "I'm a friend," I replied carefully. "I found out about the situation and wanted to help her." Harris narrowed his eyes, suspicion clear in his gaze. "Why not go to the authorities sooner?" I hesitated, knowing I couldn't tell him the whole truth. I was scared. We both were. But we couldn't just sit by and do nothing. The detective studied us for a moment longer before nodding. "All right, we need to look into this and verify your claims. Do you have any evidence?" Lisa nodded and handed over a USB drive containing everything she had gathered. "It's all there. Documents, emails, everything." Harris took the drive, and I saw a flicker of surprise cross his face. He hadn't expected us to be so prepared. "This is serious stuff. You did the right thing coming here, but you'll need to stay in protective custody while we investigate." The offer was both a relief and a new source of anxiety. Staying with the police would keep us safe from Vasquez, but it also meant staying put and possibly drawing the broker's attention. I felt trapped, the walls closing in around us. As Harris led us to a secure room, my mind raced with possibilities. We were doing the right thing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that danger lurked just out of sight, waiting for us to let our guard down. Hours passed, and the tension in the precinct was palpable. Harris and his team worked tirelessly, going through the evidence and making calls. Lisa and I sat together in silence, our nerves frayed and raw. At some point, Harris returned, his expression grave. "We've confirmed your information. The trafficking ring is real, and we've got enough to start making arrests." A wave of relief washed over us, but it was quickly tempered by Harris's next words. "But you two need to stay under protection. This is big, and there are people out there who won't be happy with what you've uncovered." I nodded, though my stomach twisted with dread. The broker was still out there, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he realized I had gone off script. I had to stay vigilant, to watch for any sign that he was closing in on us. The police moved quickly, placing us in a safe house on the outskirts of town. It was a small, nondescript building, but it felt like a fortress compared to the exposed motel we'd been in. Officers patrolled the perimeter, their presence a comforting reminder that we weren't alone. Lisa and I settled into the safe house, trying to find some semblance of normalcy in the chaos. We cooked meals together, talked about everything and nothing, and slowly let our guards down as the days passed. But even as we started to relax, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The broker wouldn't let this go easily, and I knew he would find me sooner or later. I needed a plan, something to keep us safe and end this once and for all. Late one night, as Lisa slept in the next room, I sat at the kitchen table, my mind racing with ideas. I knew the broker had resources, connections that stretched far beyond what I could see, but I also knew his methods, his patterns. I needed to get ahead of him, to find a way to confront him on my terms. It was risky, maybe even suicidal, but it was the only option I could see. I scribbled down a list of contacts and locations, my mind a blur of strategy and desperation. The first step was reaching out to an old contact, someone who owed me a favor and had a knack for finding information. If I could learn more about the broker's operations, maybe I could find a way to take him down before he found us. It was a long shot, but it was all I had. I couldn't let fear paralyze me. Not now. I had to stay sharp, to keep moving forward. The safe house felt both secure and suffocating, a reminder of how close we were to losing everything. As I sat there, the weight of my choices pressing down on me, I realized there was no turning back. I had to finish this, to protect Lisa and myself from the shadows that threatened to consume us. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new risks, but I was ready. I had to be, for Lisa, for myself, and for the chance at a life free from the darkness that had become my prison. Morning light crept through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind too restless to find peace. The plan I'd formulated in the dark hours of the night was ambitious, bordering on reckless, but it was the only way forward. It had to be executed perfectly. Lisa noticed my anxiety over breakfast, her eyes filled with concern. "You've got that look," she said softly, sipping her coffee. "What's going on?" I hesitated, weighing how much to tell her. She deserved to know, but I didn't want to put her in more danger than she already was. "I'm going to deal with the broker," I finally admitted. "It's the only way to keep us safe." Her eyes widened in alarm. "You can't be serious. He's dangerous, and you said yourself that he doesn't let go easily." "I know," I replied, forcing a reassuring smile. "But I have a plan. I just need you to trust me. Stay here, stay safe, and let me handle this." Lisa looked like she wanted to argue, but she knew better than anyone how precarious our situation was. "Just promise me you'll be careful," she said, her voice tinged with fear and hope. "I will," I promised, for the weight of the unknown hung heavy between us. I wanted to believe I could do this, that I could outsmart a man who lived in the shadows. With a final nod, I left the safe house, the officers on duty nodding as I passed. The air outside was crisp, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped me. I slipped into the car, the engine purring to life as I headed towards my first destination. My contact, a tech-savvy recluse named Eric, lived in a nondescript apartment complex on the outskirts of the town. I'd known him for years, a fellow denizen of the dark web, with a knack for finding information that others couldn't. He owed me a favor, and now was the time to call it in. Eric greeted me with a wary nod, ushering me inside. His apartment was a cluttered mess of computer parts and empty pizza boxes, but he was a genius in his own right. "Long time no see," he said, settling into his chair and gesturing for me to sit. "What brings you to my humble abode?" "I need intel on the broker," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Anything you can find. I'm in deep, Eric, and I need a way out." Eric's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, fingers flying over the keyboard as he dove into the depths of the internet. Minutes ticked by as he worked, the room filled with the hum of machinery and the rapid click of keys. Eventually, he leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Okay, here's what I've got. The broker's real name is Alexander Vaughn. He operates out of an old warehouse in the industrial district. He's got ties to several criminal organizations, which makes him untouchable to most. But there's a crack in his armor. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What is it? He's got a second in command, a guy named Marco. Rumor has it they're not on the best terms lately. If you can get to Marco, maybe you can turn him against the broker. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. Thanks, Eric. I owe you one. Just stay alive, he replied, his tone serious for once. And maybe buy me a beer when this is all over. With Eric's intel in hand, I set out for the industrial district. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a hulking structure shrouded in mist and foreboding. My plan was simple: find Marco, leverage his discontent, and dismantle the broker's operation from the inside. I parked a few blocks away, slipping through the shadows as I approached the warehouse. It was a sprawling complex, with guards patrolling the perimeter. I needed to be careful. One wrong move could end everything. I made my way to a side entrance, bypassing the security system with a few tricks I'd learned over the years. Inside, the warehouse was a labyrinth of crates and machinery, the air filled with the acrid smell of oil and metal. I moved silently, keeping to the shadows as I searched for Marco. Finally, I found him in a dimly lit office, poring over paperwork with a scowl etched on his face. He looked up as I entered, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "Who the hell are you?" Marco demanded, reaching for a weapon hidden beneath the desk. I raised my hands, trying to appear non-threatening. "I'm here to talk. I know you're not happy with the broker. I can help you take him down." Marco hesitated, his eyes flicking to the door and back to me. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the one who can get you out from under his thumb," I replied, keeping my voice calm and confident. "He's losing his grip, and if you work with me, we can finish him for good." For a tense moment, Marco weighed his options, his gaze flickering with indecision. But then he nodded, a grim determination settling over him. "All right, I'm in. What's the plan?" We spent the next hour devising a strategy, Marco outlining the weaknesses in the broker's operation and the key players who might turn against him. It was risky, but if we could destabilize his network, we could force him into the open. With our plan in place, Marco and I moved quickly, setting the pieces in motion. We reached out to disaffected associates, spreading the word that the broker's reign was coming to an end. Tension simmered within the organization, loyalties fracturing as fear took hold. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. The broker, realizing he'd been betrayed, gathered his remaining loyalists for a last stand in the warehouse. Marco and I arrived with our allies, ready to face whatever came next. The warehouse erupted into chaos, a violent clash of wills and weapons. I fought alongside Marco, my heart pounding, as we battled through the confusion. The air was thick with smoke and fear, every moment a desperate struggle for survival. Finally, we cornered the broker in his office, his arrogance and power stripped away. He glared at us, defiant to the end. "You think you've won?" he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You're nothing but insects beneath my feet." "It's over, Vaughn," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You're done." With a final, defiant snarl, the broker lunged at us, but we were ready. In a swift, decisive move, we subdued him, the weight of his empire crumbling around him. As the dust settled, I stood amidst the wreckage, my heart pounding with the adrenaline of victory. We had done it. We had taken down a monster and freed ourselves from his grasp. Lisa and I reunited later, relief and exhaustion mingling in our embrace. The ordeal had changed us both, but we had emerged stronger, our bond forged in in the crucible of danger and survival. The authorities moved in, dismantling the broker's operation and arresting those involved. Justice, long overdue, was finally served. As for me, I knew I had a long road ahead, a path of redemption and recovery. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a chance to start anew. Lisa and I left the city behind, seeking a fresh start, far from the shadows that had haunted us. The road stretched out before us, a promise of new beginnings and second chances. And as we drove into the sunrise, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, free at last and ready to embrace the light. I found a job on the deep web. I had to protect alien plants on the Antarctica. I've always been drawn to the unknown, the edges of reality where most people fear to tread. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to browse the dark web, but curiosity gets the best of us sometimes. And for me, it was a fascination with the strange and unexplained that led me there. You hear all kinds of horror stories about what people find, but I wasn't prepared for what I stumbled across. It started with a typical Friday night. I was in my cramped apartment, nursing a beer and scrolling mindlessly through social media, bored out of my mind. My life was in a rut, and I was desperate for anything to break the monotony. That's when I saw a post on a forum, buried deep in a thread about conspiracy theories and government secrets. It was a link titled, "Exotic Botany Job Opportunity, High Pay, No Experience Needed." I clicked the link without thinking twice. The page was rudimentary, just white text on a black background. It promised $10,000 a week for what sounded like the easiest job ever, monitoring a research facility in Antarctica. There was no contact information, just a button that said, "Apply now." My mind was racing. I mean, 10 grand a week. That could change my life. Pay off debts, get a new car, hell, maybe even a new apartment. The application was just a simple form asking for my name, age, and if I had any health issues. I filled it out on a whim, not expecting anything to come of it. I figured it was either a scam or some kind of elaborate prank. A few days later, I got an email. The sender's address was just a string of random letters and numbers. The message was brief. "Congratulations, you've been selected. Further instructions will follow." I was equal parts excited and skeptical, but I was mostly just in shock that they had picked me. I mean, why would they choose a nobody like me? The next email came a day later, with a plane ticket attached and a list of things to pack. It told me to expect cold weather and isolation, to bring my personal laptop, and to be ready for a life-changing experience. It all seemed too good to be true, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity. I decided to go for it, rationalizing that I could always leave if things got weird. The flight to Antarctica was surreal. It was my first time on a plane, and I felt a mix of anxiety and exhilaration as I watched the landscape change from bustling cityscapes to endless white nothingness. When I landed, a man in a thick parka met me at the tiny airport. He introduced himself as Dr. Harris, but didn't offer much else. He had an unsettling air about him, with his sharp gaze and stiff demeanor. We drove for what felt like hours through the barren, icy landscape until we reached the facility. It was a nondescript building camouflaged into the snow with its white and gray facade. Inside, it was sterile and cold, with long, dimly lit corridors that seemed to stretch on forever. Dr. Harris gave me a brief tour, explaining that the facility was home to some very rare and valuable plant specimens. He emphasized that my main job was to protect the plants at all costs. The rules were simple. Keep the doors locked at all times, never let anyone else in, and always wear protective gear when entering the greenhouse. There were a few other staff members, but they kept to themselves, each seemingly engrossed in their own tasks. My first few days passed in a blur of routine. My main task was to monitor the plants, making sure they were healthy and documenting any changes. It seemed straightforward enough until I started noticing strange things. The plants were unlike anything I had ever seen before. They were eerily beautiful, with colors that seemed to shift and pulse as if alive. But there was something unsettling about them too. They seemed to respond to my presence, the tendrils reaching out ever so slightly when I got close, like they were aware of me. One night, I heard noises coming from the greenhouse. It was well past midnight, and everyone else should have been asleep. It sounded like whispering, soft and urgent. I grabbed a flashlight and headed down the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the greenhouse, the whispers grew louder, forming into a language I couldn't understand. I shone my light into the room, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The plants were moving, their tendrils intertwining like they were communicating with one another. In the center of the room was a figure, tall and gaunt, almost human-like, but not quite. Its skin was a pale, sickly green, and its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. The figure turned to look at me, and I felt a wave of nausea and fear crash over me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It was like the creature was inside my head, probing my thoughts, filling me with a sense of dread, unlike anything I had ever felt before. Just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed my flashlight, and fled back to my quarters, my mind racing. What the hell was going on? Was I hallucinating, or had I just witnessed something truly alien? The next morning, I tried to bring it up with Dr. Harris, but he brushed me off, saying I must have been dreaming, but the look in his eyes told me he knew more than he was letting on. I began to feel trapped, isolated, not just by the endless ice and snow, but by the secrets buried within the walls of this facility. I knew I should leave, pack my things, and catch the next plane home, but something held me back. A morbid curiosity, a need to understand what I had seen, and what was really going on, and maybe, just maybe, a part of me wanted to believe the promise of something life-changing. But deep down, I knew I was in way over my head, caught in a web of secrets that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. And the more I learned, the more I realized that the plants were just the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. I woke up the next day feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My head throbbed, and my body felt heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and fear. I replayed the events of the previous night over and over in my mind, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That creature, it had been so real, so tangible, and yet it defied all logic and understanding. I tried to go about my duties as usual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the building echoed with hidden intent. The other staff members avoided eye contact, their expressions blank and unreadable, as if they were in on some twisted joke that I was too ignorant to understand. I decided to do some digging. There had to be more to this place than just alien plants. I started with the facility's database, accessing it from a dusty old computer in a back office. The system was antiquated and slow, filled with files that were locked behind layers of encryption. I spent hours sifting through data, trying passwords and key phrases at random, growing more frustrated by the minute. Finally, I hit on something. A folder labeled Project Proteus. The name sent a chill down my spine, resonating with a sense of foreboding. Inside were documents detailing experiments on extraterrestrial flora, plants not of this world. The scientists had been trying to harness their properties, extracting compounds for potential medical uses and biological enhancements. But the notes also hinted at something darker. There were mentions of side effects and unforeseen consequences. I found references to earlier expeditions where entire teams had disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the Antarctic wilderness. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that the plants weren't the only thing alien in this facility. I became obsessed, spending every spare moment poring over the files. I discovered that the plants could emit pheromones that affected human cognition, inducing hallucinations and altering perception. They were sentient in some way, capable of communication and perhaps even control. The more I learned, the more I understood that we were the ones being monitored. One night, as I was engrossed in my research, I heard footsteps outside my door. I froze, my heart racing, as I listened to the slow, deliberate tread of boots in the hallway. They stopped just outside, and I held my breath, waiting for the door to burst open. But instead, there was a soft rustling sound, followed by a thud, like something being slid under the door. I waited until the footsteps receded before creeping over to investigate. There, on the floor, was a small envelope, unmarked and sealed with tape. I tore it open with trembling hands and found a single piece of paper inside. It read, "Leave now. They know." I felt a jolt of panic and paranoia wash over me. I glanced around the room, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. Someone was watching me, someone who knew about my snooping. The envelope had been a warning, a plea for me to escape before it was too late. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and conspiracy. Who had left me that note? Could I trust them? Or was it just another layer of the manipulation that seemed to pervade every corner of this place? The next day, I was on edge, jumping at every sound and shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was closing in on me, a tightening noose of secrecy and deceit. I tried to confront Dr. Harris again, demanding answers, but he dismissed me with the same cold indifference, telling me to focus on my work. Desperation took hold, and I resolved to find out the truth. I needed to see the plants again, to confront whatever was lurking in the greenhouse. That night, under the cover of darkness, I made my way back to the greenhouse, armed with only a flashlight and my determination. As I approached, I felt a strange vibration in the air, a low hum that seemed to resonate in my bones. The plants were alive, more active than I'd ever seen them. Their tendrils swayed and pulsed, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest, and immediately felt that familiar wave of nausea and fear. The figure was there again, standing amidst the plants like a guardian, or perhaps a prisoner. Its eyes glowed with that same otherworldly light, and I felt its presence probing my mind, searching for something. I fought the urge to flee, forcing myself to stay and face whatever this was. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the thrum of the plants. The figure tilted its head, and I felt a rush of images flood my mind. Visions of alien worlds, vast and strange, teeming with life, both beautiful and terrifying. I saw civilizations rise and fall, their secrets buried beneath layers of time and space. And then I saw Earth, our planet, fragile and vulnerable in the face of something incomprehensible. It was then that I understood. The plants, the figure, they were refugees, survivors of some cosmic cataclysm, seeking refuge in the cold isolation of Antarctica. But they weren't alone. Something else had followed them, something dark and hungry, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. I stumbled back, overwhelmed by the enormity of it all. This wasn't just a research facility. It was a battleground, a place where the boundaries between worlds had blurred and collided, and I was caught in the middle, an unwitting pawn in a game that transcended human understanding. I knew I had to get out, to escape before whatever was coming reached me. But as I turned to leave, I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and unyielding. I spun around, but there was no one there, just the oppressive presence of the plants and their silent, knowing gaze. I fled back to my room, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. I didn't know who to trust, what to believe. All I knew was that I had to survive, to unravel the mystery before it consumed me whole. The real horror was only just beginning, and I was trapped in its grip, with no way out. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened paranoia, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every sound. I felt like a prisoner in that facility, trapped by walls of snow and secrecy. The weight of the unknown pressed down on me, suffocating me with each passing hour. I knew I needed to find a way out, but the more I planned, the more impossible it seemed. The other staff members had become even more distant. Their eyes seemed hollow, as if they were under some kind of trance. I couldn't trust them. Hell, I couldn't even trust myself. The warning in that note kept echoing in my mind. Leave now. They know. But how could I leave when the very air seemed to conspire against me? Every night I dreamt of the figure in the greenhouse, its glowing eyes piercing into my soul. I would wake up drenched in sweat, my heart racing, the whispers from the greenhouse still echoing in my ears. I needed to figure out what was really happening, and I needed to do it fast. One afternoon, as I was walking through the corridors, I heard voices coming from behind a closed door. I pressed my ear against it, straining to hear. Dr. Harris was speaking with someone, his voice low and urgent. "We need to contain it before it spreads," he said. "The entity is becoming unstable, and if it breaches the perimeter, we're finished." The other voice was unfamiliar, a woman's voice, cold and authoritative. "Our benefactors won't tolerate failure, Harris. You know what's at stake. If this gets out, it's not just the facility that's at risk. It's the entire planet." I felt a chill run down my spine. The gravity of their conversation was terrifying. They weren't just dealing with alien plants. They were dealing with something much more dangerous, something that had the potential to wreak havoc on a global scale. I needed to get out of there, but I knew I couldn't do it alone. I had to find someone I could trust, someone who could help me escape this nightmare. But who? The staff were all in on it, and Dr. Harris was clearly hiding something. That night, I lay in bed, my mind racing with possibilities. I considered reaching out to the person who had left me the note, but I had no idea how to contact them. I needed a plan, something that would get me out of the facility and back to civilization. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I heard a soft tapping at my door. I froze, my heart pounding. The tapping continued, insistent and rhythmic. I got up and crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. "Who is it?" I whispered. "It's me," came a voice. It was Sarah, one of the researchers I'd seen around the facility. I barely knew her, but she seemed different from the others, more aware, less robotic. I hesitated, then opened the door a crack. Sarah slipped inside, glancing around nervously before closing the door behind her. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They're planning something big, and we need to stop it." "Stop what?" I asked, my mind reeling. "What the hell is going on here, Sarah?" She took a deep breath, her eyes darting to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "The plants, they're not just plants. They're part of a hive mind, connected to something much larger and more dangerous. Dr. Harris and the others have been trying to weaponize them, but they've lost control." Her words sent a jolt of fear through me. Weaponize them? The idea was insane, but it also explained the secrecy, the paranoia that permeated the facility. "How do we stop it?" I asked, desperate for answers. "There's a fail-safe," she said. "In the main control room. We can override the system and shut everything down, but we have to move fast. Once they realize what we're doing, they'll try to stop us." I nodded, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This was it, my chance to escape and put an end to whatever nightmare had taken root in this frozen wasteland. Sarah led the way through the dimly lit corridors, moving quickly and quietly. My heart was in my throat, every sound amplified in the silence. We reached the control room, and Sarah punched in a code on the keypad. The door clicked open, and we slipped inside. The room was filled with monitors and consoles, the screens displaying various data and images of the facility. Sarah went to work, typing furiously as she navigated through the system. "Once we activate the failsafe, we'll have about 10 minutes to get out before the whole place goes into lockdown," she explained, her voice tense but focused. I watched as she worked, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was our only chance, and if we failed, there was no telling what would happen. Suddenly, an alarm blared, the red lights flashing ominously. "Damn it! They've detected us!" Sarah exclaimed, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "Can you do it?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "I think so," she replied, her brow furrowed with concentration. "But you need to go now. Get to the entrance and wait for me. I'll be right behind you." I hesitated, not wanting to leave her alone, but I knew she was right. We didn't have time to argue. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my ears as the alarm continued to wail. The facility was a maze of corridors and rooms, and I raced through them, my mind focused on one thing: escape. As I reached the entrance, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, expecting to see Sarah, but instead I was met with the cold, calculating gaze of Dr. Harris. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I backed away, fear clawing at my insides. "I know enough," I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're playing with fire, and you're going to burn us all." He chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You're too late. The process has already begun. There's no stopping it now." I felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't let him win, couldn't let whatever nightmare he was unleashing take hold. But before I could move, Sarah appeared behind him, her face determined and resolute. "Run!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'll hold him off. Just get out of here." I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and sprinted toward the exit, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced against time. The cold air hit me like a slap as I burst outside, the snow crunching under my feet. As I ran, I glanced back and saw Sarah and Dr. Harris locked in a struggle, their figures silhouetted against the glowing lights of the facility. I wanted to go back to help her, but I knew I had to keep going. I stumbled through the snow, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The facility loomed behind me, a dark silhouette against the endless white. I didn't stop until I was far enough away, the building a distant shadow on the horizon. I collapsed to my knees, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. I had escaped, but at what cost? The true horror of what was happening in that facility was only beginning to unravel, and I was powerless to stop it. The icy wind whipped around me, and I realized I was alone in the vast expanse of Antarctica, with no idea how to get back to civilization. But I couldn't stay there, not with the knowledge of what lay behind me. I had to keep moving to find a way to warn the world before it was too late. The real fight was just beginning, and I was determined to survive. The Antarctic wilderness was relentless, a vast, icy desert stretching endlessly in all directions. I stumbled through the snow, each step a battle against the bitter cold and the growing exhaustion. I'd been walking for hours, maybe longer, my only goal to put as much distance between myself and the facility as possible. But with every passing minute, the realization hit me. I was utterly alone, with no idea where to go or how to survive in this frozen hellscape. My thoughts kept returning to Sarah and her sacrifice. She had given me a chance to escape, to warn the world about what was happening. But was it enough? The nagging fear that I might never make it out gnawed at me, a constant reminder of my dire situation. I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. I had no food, no shelter, nothing but the clothes on my back and the dwindling hope that I might find help. The cold seeped into my bones, numbing my fingers and toes. I could barely feel my face, and my breath came in shallow gasps, each one visible in the frigid air. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I spotted something on the horizon, a faint glimmer of light. It was barely visible against the snow and ice, but it was enough to ignite a spark of hope within me. I altered my course, heading toward the light, praying that it would lead me to safety. As I drew closer, I realized it was a small outpost, a research station similar to the one I'd left behind. Relief washed over me, giving me the strength to push forward. My legs felt like lead, and my vision blurred with exhaustion, but I forced myself to keep going. When I finally reached the station, I banged on the door with what little strength I had left. "Help!" I shouted, my voice hoarse and desperate. "Please, I need help." The door swung open, and I was greeted by a middle-aged man in a thick parka. His eyes widened in shock as he took in my disheveled appearance. "Good God, what happened to you?" he asked, ushering me inside. I stumbled over the threshold, collapsing onto the floor. The warmth of the station enveloped me, and I shivered violently as the heat began to seep into my frozen limbs. The man hurried to my side, helping me onto a couch and wrapping me in a thick blanket. "Take it easy," he said, his voice calm and soothing. "You're safe now. My name is Tom." "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I escaped from a facility. They're doing experiments. Something terrible is happening there." Tom listened intently as I recounted my ordeal, his expression growing more serious with each passing detail. When I finished, he let out a low whistle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, This region is dangerous, and not just because of the weather. There are things out here, things that don't belong. What do you mean? I asked, a sense of unease settling over me. Tom leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. I've been stationed here for years, and I've seen some strange things. Lights in the sky, odd signals on the radio. But what you're describing, it sounds like something beyond our understanding. I nodded, grateful to have someone who believed me. We have to do something, I said, urgency creeping into my voice. I need to get back to civilization, to warn people. Tom agreed and set about contacting the main research base. It was a small comfort, knowing that help might be on the way, but it didn't erase the fear that gnawed at me. Whatever was happening at that facility was far from over, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. As night fell, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, set my nerves on edge. I sat by the window, staring out at the endless expanse of white, lost in thought. Was Sarah okay? Had she managed to escape, or had Dr. Harris captured her? In the middle of the night, a soft knock at the door startled me. I glanced at Tom, who was asleep on the couch, then approached the door cautiously. My heart pounded in my chest as I opened it, half expecting to see one of those alien creatures standing on the other side. Instead, it was Sarah. She was battered and bruised, but alive. Relief washed over me, and I pulled her inside, wrapping her in a blanket. She sank onto the couch, her eyes wide and haunted. I didn't think I'd make it, she said, her voice trembling. Harris, he's lost it. He's unleashed something he can't control. What do you mean? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. It's spreading, she replied, her eyes filled with terror. The plants, the entity, it's escaped the facility. If we don't stop it, it'll spread beyond Antarctica. We're running out of time. Her words sent a chill down my spine. The threat wasn't just contained to that isolated research station. It was a ticking time bomb with the potential to devastate the world. I knew then that our ordeal was far from over. Tom woke up, and together we formulated a plan. We needed to contact the authorities, to alert them to the danger before it was too late. But communications in this remote region were unreliable at best, and we had no idea if anyone would believe us. As dawn broke, we set out, determined to reach a nearby communication hub. It was a long, treacherous journey, but we couldn't afford to wait any longer. The stakes were too high, the consequences too dire. The trek was grueling, the icy wind cutting through our clothes and sapping our strength. But we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure wasn't an option. The world was counting on us, even if it didn't know it yet. Hours passed, and just when I thought I couldn't take another step, we spotted the hub in the distance. It was a squat, unassuming building, but to us, it was salvation. We quickened our pace, our hearts pounding with anticipation. Inside, Tom worked to establish a connection, his fingers flying over the controls. Sarah and I stood by, watching anxiously as he tried to reach someone, anyone who could help. Finally, we heard a crackle of static, followed by a voice on the other end. "This is McMurdo Station. Who's there?" Tom grabbed the radio, his voice urgent. "This is Tom Jenkins at Outpost 31. We have a situation, an emergency. We need to speak with someone in charge immediately." There was a pause, and then the voice returned, more serious this time. "Understood, Tom. Hold tight. We're sending a team your way." Relief washed over me, mingled with a sense of apprehension. We'd taken the first step, but the road ahead was still fraught with danger. The entity was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its chance to strike. I glanced at Sarah, her face lined with determination and fear. Together, we had faced unimaginable horrors, and I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning, that the real nightmare was yet to come, and that we were standing on the precipice of something far greater and more terrifying than we could ever imagine. And in that moment, I realized that the true battle wasn't against the cold or the isolation, but against the unknown and the secrets that lay buried beneath the ice, waiting to be uncovered. The wait for the rescue team felt like an eternity. Every tick of the clock heightened our anxiety, the knowledge that the entity was still out there gnawing at us. We were on high alert, aware that every second counted. The hub was cramped and cold, but it felt safer than anywhere else in this frozen wasteland. Sarah, Tom, and I huddled around a small space heater, trying to stave off the chill. We spoke in low voices, discussing our next steps and what we would tell the authorities. But no matter how much we talked, the looming threat never seemed to diminish. Hours passed, and finally, we heard the unmistakable roar of helicopter blades cutting through the air. We rushed outside, shielding our eyes from the snow kicked up by the rotor wash. A chopper was descending, emblazoned with the insignia of a rescue team from McMurdo Station. A sense of relief washed over me as the helicopter touched down and the rescue team emerged, clad in thick, insulated gear. Their leader, a woman named Captain Reeves, approached us with a determined stride. "We've been briefed on the situation," Captain Reeves said, her voice steady and authoritative. "Let's get you out of here and back to McMurdo. We'll debrief there and decide on our next steps." I nodded, grateful for the prospect of finally leaving this nightmare behind. But even as we boarded the helicopter, a nagging fear lingered in the back of my mind. We were leaving, but what about the entity? Would it follow us? Could it be contained? The flight back to McMurdo was tense. Sarah sat next to me, her expression unreadable, while Tom watched the horizon with wary eyes. I tried to focus on the rhythmic thrum of the helicopter blades, using the sound to drown out my fears. As we approached McMurdo Station, I was struck by how small and vulnerable it seemed against the vast, unforgiving landscape. It was a reminder of how isolated we truly were, and how precarious our situation had become. Once we landed, we were ushered into a debriefing room, where a team of officials waited to hear our story. I recounted everything: the experiments, the alien plants, the entity, while Sarah and Tom filled in the gaps. As we spoke, the room fell silent, the gravity of our words sinking in. Captain Reeves listened intently, her expression grave. When we finished, she leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "This is serious," she said. "If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with an unprecedented threat. We'll need to mobilize resources and work with international agencies to contain this." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. The thought of an international crisis, sparked by something we had inadvertently unleashed, was terrifying, but I knew it was necessary. The entity had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, McMurdo Station buzzed with activity. Teams were assembled, strategies were devised, and plans were set in motion to neutralize the threat. I watched from the sidelines, a mixture of fear and hope coursing through me. But even as we prepared for the worst, Strange things began to happen. Equipment malfunctioned, communications were disrupted, and there were reports of sightings, shadowy figures glimpsed at the edge of the base, vanishing before they could be investigated. I couldn't shake the feeling that the entity was still with us, lurking just out of sight. It was as if it had a consciousness of its own, a malevolent force bent on spreading chaos and destruction. One night, as I lay awake in my bunk, I heard a faint whispering outside my window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were similar to those I'd heard in the greenhouse, a soft, insidious sound that seemed to worm its way into my mind. I crept to the window, peering out into the darkness. The snow glowed faintly in the moonlight, but there was nothing there, no sign of movement or life. Yet the whispers continued, growing louder and more insistent. I turned away, trying to block out the sound, but deep down, I knew what it meant. The entity was still here, still watching, still waiting for its chance to strike. We hadn't escaped it, not really. We had only delayed the inevitable. In the days that followed, the situation grew more dire. The entity's influence spread, affecting equipment, causing power outages, and creating a sense of unease that permeated the base. I could see it in the eyes of the people around me. The fear, the uncertainty, the realization that we were facing something far beyond our comprehension. Finally, Captain Reeves made a decision. We needed to confront the entity directly, to find a way to communicate with it and understand its motives. It was a risky plan, but it was our only hope of preventing a catastrophe. A team was assembled, consisting of researchers, military personnel, and a few volunteers. Sarah, Tom, and I were among them, determined to see this through to the end. We prepared to return to the facility, where it all began, hoping to make contact and find a way to contain the threat. The journey back was fraught with tension, each of us acutely aware of the stakes. We arrived at the facility, our nerves on edge, ready to face whatever awaited us. As we entered the greenhouse, the plants seemed to come alive, their tendrils swaying and pulsing with an otherworldly energy. I felt that familiar sense of dread, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. Sarah stepped forward, holding a device designed to amplify brainwaves, allowing us to communicate with the entity. We had no idea if it would work, but it was our only option. She activated the device, and we waited, holding our breath as the air hummed with tension. Slowly, the figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with that same eerie light. "We mean no harm," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We want to understand, to find a way to coexist." The entity regarded us, its gaze piercing and inscrutable. For a moment, I thought we had failed, that it would reject our attempts at communication. But then, I felt a rush of images flood my mind, images of worlds beyond our own, of civilizations lost and forgotten, of a cosmos teeming with life and possibility. And I understood. The entity wasn't a threat, but a survivor, a remnant of something greater than we could ever imagine. It was seeking refuge, a place to exist without fear, without conflict, and we, in our ignorance and fear, had misunderstood its intentions. The realization hit me like a wave, washing away my fear and replacing it with a sense of awe. We had the opportunity to forge a connection, to learn from something beyond our wildest dreams. As the entity shared its knowledge, I felt a sense of hope, a belief that we could find a way to coexist, to bridge the gap between our worlds. And in that moment, I knew that our journey was far from over. We had uncovered a mystery that defied explanation, a truth that challenged everything we knew, but we were no longer afraid. we were united in purpose, ready to face whatever came next. As we stood there, surrounded by the glowing tendrils of the alien plants, I realized that this was only the beginning. The real adventure lay ahead, in the uncharted territories of the cosmos, where the boundaries between worlds blurred and anything was possible. And for the first time, I felt truly alive, ready to embrace the unknown and discover the secrets of the universe. I ordered a cursed diamond of the deep web. It's artificial rock found on the Antarctica, and I couldn't believe it. I'm not really sure where to begin, so I'll just start with this. Don't ever, and I mean ever, buy anything off the deep web. I thought I was being edgy and cool, ordering something I shouldn't have been able to get my hands on, but I ended up in a living nightmare. I've always been fascinated by weird, obscure stuff. You know, those things that are supposed to be locked away from the public. So when I stumbled onto a forum discussing this supposedly cursed diamond, I was intrigued. The post claimed that the diamond wasn't your typical shiny rock. It was artificial and found in some secretive dig in Antarctica. Apparently, it had strange properties. Some said it was a new element. Others said it was alien. That should have been my first red flag, but my curiosity got the best of me. I had a decent amount of cryptocurrency saved up, enough to make the purchase without really thinking about the consequences. A few days later, I received an email with instructions. There was no shipping address, just a time and location for pickup. An old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Sketchy, right? But again, curiosity overrode common sense. The warehouse was exactly what you'd expect from a horror movie set. Broken windows, rusted metal everywhere, and the faint smell of something I couldn't quite identify, but knew wasn't good. I was alone, or at least I thought I was, until I heard footsteps echoing through the empty building. A tall man with a hood approached me. He didn't say much, just handed over a small heavy box and disappeared back into the shadows. I tried to call out to him, ask him more about the diamond, but it was like he evaporated into thin air. On the drive home, I could feel my anxiety creeping up. I kept glancing at the box on the passenger seat, almost expecting it to move or make a sound. My mind was racing, playing tricks on me, making me think about all the stories I had read on that forum about people who had gone mad or worse after possessing the diamond. When I got home, I carefully unwrapped the box. Inside was a smooth, dark stone, glistening with an otherworldly sheen. It was almost hypnotic. As I held it, I felt a strange warmth spreading through my hands. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was definitely unusual. That night, I had the worst sleep of my life. I was plagued by vivid nightmares, dark figures with hollow eyes watching me, whispering things I couldn't understand. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. The diamond was on my nightstand, glowing faintly in the dark room. The next morning, things started getting even weirder. I noticed small cuts on my arms and legs, like paper cuts, but deeper. I couldn't remember how I got them, and they weren't there the night before. It was like the diamond was somehow linked to whatever was happening to me. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild, but then I started hearing whispers. At first, I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the neighbors, but the whispers were persistent, always just on the edge of hearing. They seemed to be coming from the diamond. I was seriously freaked out, but returning the diamond wasn't an option. I had no contact information, no way to trace back to whoever gave it to me. I was stuck with this thing, and it was clearly doing something to me. My friends started noticing the change in me. I was jumpy, paranoid, and couldn't focus on anything for more than a few minutes. I couldn't tell them about the diamond. They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I was starting to think I was crazy. I started researching online, desperate to find a way to break whatever curse this was. But the deeper I dug, the more horror stories I found. People who'd gone insane, disappeared, or worse, after getting involved with this diamond. The final straw was when I woke up one morning with a strange symbol carved into my skin. It was intricate, almost like a tattoo, but it burned like hell. I tried washing it off, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in, real panic, like I was being watched or followed. I could feel eyes on me everywhere I went, and the whispers had grown louder, more insistent. This was no ordinary diamond. I was sure of it now. I had to get rid of it, but the damn thing wouldn't let me. Every time I tried to throw it away or destroy it, it'd end up back on my nightstand, glowing that eerie glow, like it was taunting me. I was spiraling, and fast. I knew I had to do something before it completely consumed me. The only thing I could think of was finding a way to contact someone who knew more about this cursed object, someone who could help me end whatever nightmare I brought into my life. But time was running out, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold on before the whispers drove me to do something I couldn't come back from. When I found myself staring at the diamond again, I knew I was losing it. I couldn't remember how I had gotten out of bed or how long I'd been sitting there. I felt like a puppet, my strings pulled by some invisible force. The glowing rock was at the center of it all, and I was helpless against its pull. My hands were trembling as I held the diamond, feeling its warmth radiate through me like a fever I couldn't shake. My first thought was to try and destroy it. I grabbed a hammer from my toolbox, intent on smashing the thing to pieces. But the moment the hammer connected, it felt like an electric shock traveled up my arm, knocking me back onto the floor. I lay there, stunned, while the whispers in my head grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, clear and demanding, speaking a language I couldn't comprehend, but somehow understood was a command. Desperate, I reached out to a friend of mine, Jess. She was into all sorts of occult stuff, so if anyone could help me, it was her. I shot her a text, asking if she could come over and check something out. It didn't take long for her to respond with a casual, "Sure, be there in an hour." I didn't tell her about the diamond over text. I was too paranoid that someone or something was watching, and I didn't want to risk any more exposure than necessary. Jess showed up just as I was about to lose my mind. I could see the concern in her eyes the moment she stepped through the door. "Wow, you look like hell," she said, half joking, but I couldn't even muster a smile. I handed her the diamond without a word, hoping she'd feel it too, that creeping dread, the sense of being watched. She turned it over in her hands, squinting at the strange surface. "Where did you get this?" she asked, but her voice was suddenly muffled, as if she was speaking underwater. Her eyes widened in fear, and I knew she was experiencing something similar to what I was. "Deep web," I managed to say. "I thought it was a joke, a scam, but Jess, it's doing something to me. I can't get rid of it." She nodded, setting the diamond down carefully on the table. "I've heard about things like this. They're called objects of intent. used in rituals or to focus dark energies. You're not just holding a diamond, you're holding a curse, a conduit for something that shouldn't be in this world. The room felt colder as she spoke, her words seeping into my skin. She started explaining how these objects needed to be handled carefully, and I could feel the air getting heavy, almost suffocating. I could hear the whispers growing louder in the background. "I think I know someone who can help," Jess said, pulling out her phone. She contacted a friend of hers, some guy who apparently dealt with paranormal cases. I was skeptical, but I was out of options. Whatever was happening to me, it was beyond anything I could handle alone. While we waited for him to arrive, Jess suggested we try to contain the diamond's influence. She drew a circle of salt around it, muttering words I couldn't understand, and it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders just slightly. The whispers faded, but they didn't disappear entirely. I took a moment to look around my apartment, noticing how disheveled everything had become. Papers and clothes were strewn everywhere, dishes piled up in the sink. It was like I'd been living in a fog, unaware of the chaos forming around me. Jess sat next to me, her presence reassuring, but not enough to dispel the fear clutching at my heart. Finally, her contact showed up, a guy named Mark, who looked more like a washed-up rock star than a paranormal investigator. He had that world-weary vibe, like he'd seen too much and lived to tell the tale. "You're the one with the rock?" he asked, looking me over with a skeptical eye. I nodded, showing him the diamond inside the salt circle. Mark circled the table, examining the stone without touching it. "This is serious stuff," he said finally. "You've got yourself a beacon, allure. Whatever's connected to this thing is trying to use you to come through. You're lucky it's only been whispers." I shuddered at the thought of what else might happen if we didn't stop it. Jess asked him what we could do, and Mark explained that we needed to perform a sort of exorcism, a way to sever the connection between the diamond and whatever entity it was linked to. We spent the next hour preparing, gathering supplies, and setting up in my living room. Mark drew symbols on the floor with chalk, explaining each one as he worked. Jess helped him, her face tense with concentration. Meanwhile, I hovered around the edges, feeling useless and terrified. As the ritual began, I could feel a pressure building in the room, like we were underwater, and the air was being squeezed out. Mark started chanting in a language I didn't understand, his voice rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern. Jess joined in, her voice shaky but strong. The diamond began to glow again, brighter this time, and the whispers returned, louder and more demanding than before. I covered my ears, but it did nothing to block them out. They were in my head, clawing at my mind, and I could feel something dark and ancient pushing against the barrier Mark and Jess were trying to hold. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, like thunder inside the apartment. The diamond exploded in a burst of light, sending shards flying across the room. I felt a sharp pain in my arm and realized a piece had cut me, blood dripping down my skin. The whispers stopped, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Mark slumped against the wall, exhausted but relieved. "It's over," he said, breathing heavily. "We cut the link. You're free." But as I looked around the wreckage of my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air felt different, heavier, like a presence was lingering just out of sight. I knew we had stopped whatever was trying to come through, but I also knew that some things, once invited in, never really leave. After that night, I thought everything would go back to normal. The diamond was gone, the whispers had stopped, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. But things were far from okay. The first sign that something was still wrong came when I started noticing subtle changes around my apartment. Objects weren't where I remembered leaving them. Shadows seemed to stretch and shift in ways they shouldn't, and I kept getting this gnawing sensation that I was being watched. I tried to chalk it up to paranoia, residual fear from my encounter with the cursed diamond. But when I started seeing things, I knew it was more than that. It was small at first, like flashes out of the corner of my eye. Then I started seeing faces in the reflections, twisted and hollow-eyed, staring back at me with that same malice I'd felt when I first held the diamond. One night, I was lying in bed, desperately trying to fall asleep, when I heard a soft rustling noise. My heart started pounding, the kind of panic you feel when you're home alone and hear something that shouldn't be there. I sat up, scanning the dark room, and that's when I saw it. A figure standing at the foot of my bed, barely visible in the dim light. It was tall and thin, with elongated limbs and a face that seemed to melt into shadow. Its eyes were empty sockets, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. I froze, my body locked in terror as it slowly leaned over, bringing its face close to mine. The air grew icy, and I couldn't breathe, my lungs refusing to take in air. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move, trapped under its oppressive presence. Just as I thought I was going to pass out, it whispered my name, a soft hiss that filled the room and rattled in my bones. And then it was gone. The room was empty again, the only sound the rapid beating of my heart. I scrambled for the light, flicking it on with shaking hands, expecting the figure to reappear. But it was just me, alone in the glaring light of my bedroom. I called Jess the next day, desperate for some kind of explanation. She came over, bringing Mark with her, and they listened as I recounted what had happened. Mark seemed troubled, a deep frown creasing his forehead. "It sounds like there's a residual energy left behind," he said. "Something might have slipped through before we could close the connection completely. We need to perform a cleansing, drive out whatever might be lingering." We spent the afternoon preparing for another ritual, this time to cleanse my apartment of any lingering spirits or energies. Jess and Mark lit sage, walking through each room as they chanted prayers and spells designed to purify the space. The air felt charged, like a storm was brewing just outside, but slowly it began to lift. The shadows receded, the oppressive feeling of being watched faded, and the air lightened. It seemed to work, and for a while I allowed myself to believe that things might finally be over. I went back to my usual routine, trying to put the whole nightmare behind me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong, like a bad taste lingering at the back of my mouth. I started seeing it again, the figure, always just out of sight, slipping away the moment I tried to focus on it. It was watching, waiting, and no matter how many times we cleansed the apartment, it wouldn't leave. My nights were plagued with nightmares. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my skin prickling with fear. The figure was always there, whispering my name in that same haunting voice, promising things that chilled my soul. I started to dread sleep, knowing that each time I closed my eyes, it would be there, lurking in the shadows. I was losing my grip on reality, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those hollow eyes watching me. I couldn't keep living like this. in constant fear of something I couldn't fight. Jess and Mark were doing their best to help, but it wasn't enough. Whatever this thing was, it was beyond our understanding, and it was growing stronger. I knew I had to do something drastic, something that would sever whatever connection this entity had to me. But the deeper I dug, the more horror stories I found of people who'd tried and failed, disappearing without a trace or worse. I started researching every possible method of banishment, seeking out experts and poring through ancient texts, desperate for anything that might help. I was determined to end this, no matter what it took. As I delved into my research, I stumbled upon something that gave me hope. A ritual said to bind and banish even the most powerful of spirits. It was risky, dangerous, and involved elements that seemed impossible to acquire. But it was my only shot, my last chance to reclaim my life from the clutches of this nightmare. The ritual required a personal sacrifice, something precious that held meaning and power. I didn't know if I had the strength to go through with it, but I was out of options. This was my last chance to break free from whatever hell I had unwittingly brought upon myself. The ritual was all I could think about. It was dangerous, but if it meant ending this nightmare, I was willing to try anything. I gathered the materials I needed, which was no easy feat. The list included rare herbs, ancient symbols etched on parchment, and a personal item infused with strong emotions. For me, that was a bracelet my mother had given me before she passed away. It was the last thing I had from her, and the thought of using it terrified me, but I knew I had no other choice. I called Jess and Mark over, explaining what I planned to do. They were both worried, but they knew I was desperate, and they agreed to help me. We set up everything in my living room, clearing out the furniture to make space for the ritual circle. Mark drew the symbols on the floor with chalk, double-checking everything to make sure we had it right. Jess lit candles around the circle, their flames flickering in the dim light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As we prepared, the air grew tense, charged with energy. I could feel the presence growing stronger, the oppressive weight of its gaze on us as we worked. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the task at hand, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was aware of what we were doing and wasn't going to let us proceed without a fight. Finally, we were ready. Mark started chanting in a language that seemed to vibrate in the air, his voice deep and resonant. Jess joined in, and I followed suit, feeling the words reverberate through me. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if the room was closing in around us. As the chanting continued, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, and a cold wind swept through the space, extinguishing some of the candles. I could feel the presence growing angrier, its energy swirling around us like a storm. I gripped my mother's bracelet tightly, focusing on the warmth of her memory, hoping it would be enough. Suddenly, the room plunged into darkness, the candles snuffed out by an unseen force. The only light came from the faint glow of the chalk symbols on the floor, casting an otherworldly light on our faces. I felt a chill creep up my spine as the air grew colder, a palpable sense of malevolence pressing down on us. Then I saw it, the figure, standing just outside the circle, its hollow eyes fixed on me. It reached out a skeletal hand, and I felt a pull, like it was trying to drag me into its world. My heart raced, panic clawing at me, but I couldn't look away. Mark's chanting grew louder, more insistent, as he tried to push back against the entity. I joined him, pouring everything I had into the words, hoping against hope that it would be enough. Jess clutched the bracelet with me, her voice trembling but strong. The figure hesitated, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. I could feel its anger, its desperation, as it tried to break through the barrier we'd created. But slowly, agonizingly, it began to retreat, drawn back into the shadows from which it had come. With one final surge of energy, we finished the ritual, the last words echoing in the room. There was a blinding flash of light, and then silence. The oppressive weight lifted, leaving the air light and clear. The presence finally gone, I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The figure was gone, and the whispers had faded into nothingness. Jess and Mark helped me up, their faces reflecting the same exhaustion and relief I felt. The room was a mess, the symbols smudged and candles melted down to nubs. But it didn't matter. We had done it. We had broken the connection, banished whatever had been haunting me. As I held my mother's bracelet, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I knew I'd lost something precious, but it was a sacrifice I'd been willing to make. It was the only way to end the nightmare. We spent the next few hours cleaning up, trying to make sense of what had happened. I knew that I'd never be the same, that the experience had changed me in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. But I was alive, and I was free. Jess and Mark left, promising to check in on me in the coming days. I was alone, in my apartment, finally able to relax for the first time in what felt like forever. The shadows were just shadows now. The silence, a comforting presence rather than a looming threat. I knew I'd never forget what had happened, but I was determined to move on, to live my life without fear. The diamond was gone, its power broken, and I was finally free to start over. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, just out of sight. It was a whisper of a sensation, barely noticeable, but it was there. I told myself it was just my imagination, a remnant of the fear I'd lived with for so long. But deep down, I knew that some things, once they touch your life, never really let go. The darkness might be gone, but its shadow remained, a reminder of the nightmare I'd survived and the price I'd paid to escape it. The days following the ritual were a haze of exhaustion and cautious optimism. I tried to reclaim my life, to pick up the pieces and move on. I kept in touch with Jess and Mark, who checked in regularly, making sure I was holding up. They were a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. But as much as I wanted to believe the nightmare was over, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The shadows were gone, and the whispers had ceased, but there was a nagging sense of unease that I couldn't put into words. It felt like something was still watching, waiting just beyond the edge of my perception. One night, as I was lying in bed, I felt a familiar chill creep over me. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, and everything was silent, but there was a heaviness in the air that I recognized all too well. I reached for the light switch, my fingers fumbling in the dark. But as I flipped it on, the bulb exploded with a loud pop, plunging me into darkness. Panic gripped me as I scrambled for my phone, using its light to scan the room. I felt a prickling on the back of my neck, like someone was standing right behind me. The air was cold, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, residual fear from everything I'd been through. But then I saw it, a shadow shifting in the corner of the room, darker than the rest, taking form. My breath caught in my throat as the figure emerged from the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on me with a predatory intensity. It was back, more solid and menacing than before. I could feel its presence pressing down on me, cold and suffocating. I backed away, my heart racing, trying to remember everything I'd learned about dealing with spirits. But my mind was blank, frozen with fear as the figure advanced, whispering in that same chilling voice that haunted my dreams. Desperation drove me to grab the closest thing I could find, a candle from the nightstand. I fumbled with the lighter, my hands shaking as I tried to ignite it. Finally, the flame flickered to life, casting a small circle of light around me. The figure hesitated, its form wavering. In the flickering light, I took a shaky breath, drawing on every ounce of courage I had left. I spoke, my voice barely above a whisper, but filled with determination. "You don't belong here," I said, my words firm. "You're not welcome. Leave me alone." For a moment, nothing happened. The figure stood there, watching me with those empty eyes, its presence cold and unyielding. But then, slowly, it began to dissolve, fading back into the shadows from which it had come. As it vanished, the oppressive weight lifted, leaving me alone in the quiet darkness of my room. I sat there, the candle flickering softly, my heart gradually slowing as the realization sank in. I had faced it and survived. The days that followed were a blur of cautious relief. I threw myself into work and routine, determined to put as much distance between myself and that nightmare as possible. I spent time with friends, surrounding myself with laughter and light, refusing to let the shadows back in. Jess and Mark were invaluable, their support helping me rebuild my life. They had been through their own battles with the paranormal, and their understanding was a balm for my frayed nerves. They encouraged me to seek therapy, to talk about my experiences, and I reluctantly agreed. It wasn't easy, revisiting the horror, but it helped me process everything that had happened and begin to heal. Though the entity was gone, the experience left scars, unseen but felt deeply. I was more cautious, aware of the shadows that lurked in the corners of the world. I knew I'd never be the same, but I also knew I was stronger for having faced it. The diamond was a lesson, a reminder of the dangers that lay beyond the veil of our reality. I'd been foolish to seek it out, to play with forces I didn't understand, but I'd survived, and I was determined to learn from my mistakes, to be more cautious in the future. Even now, as I write this, I can't say for certain that the entity is truly gone. I haven't seen it since that night, but I'm aware of its lingering presence, like a distant memory that occasionally brushes against my mind, but I refuse to live in fear. I've reclaimed my life, piece by piece, and I'm determined to keep moving forward. The world is a strange, unpredictable place, and while I know there are still mysteries I'll never understand, I've learned to approach them with respect and caution. Whatever happens, I'm ready to face it. I've survived the darkness once, and I'm confident I can do it again. The shadows might linger, but they no longer hold power over me. I'm free, and I intend to stay that way. In the end, I've learned that some things are better left undiscovered, untouched by human curiosity. The world is full of wonders, but it's also full of dangers, and I've learned to tread carefully in the darkness, always mindful of the light.